Good afternoon. We want to welcome you to our second edition of Community Conversations here in District 86. And there's a panel of presenters today that we'll be hearing from as we go through the work that our Secondary Instructional Task Force has been up to. So with that, Dr. Kavita, if you don't mind advancing the slide. Just a reminder, this is our first inaugural attempt, the second edition of Community Conversations, and it's really just another level of feedback cycle. We have a board committee called PTAC that we typically bring together any of our strategic plan pieces of information around students' curriculum and interventions. And so this is just another layer that we've added this year, and so these informal conversations are intended to further inform our PTAC meetings, which will occur later this month. So just a reminder, part of our norms here are community conversations. We use these in all of our meetings here in the district, and those are just the norms for our meeting today. And Dr. Kavita is going to go over the structure of the agenda for today.
Okay. Audience, we are going to have about an hour of a presentation. It's not an hour presentation, an hour session with a little bit of presentation and a good portion of interaction. So a short presentation a couple different times during the hour with a request for questions, clarification, and or other pieces of feedback. We want to have some intentional dialogue, so on 4 specific areas of the work that's been done by the Secondary Instructional Schedule Committee. For some context, we actually did a very similar version of this conversation yesterday with that committee. And if you're at the PTAC meeting next week, you'll see a very similar version of this conversation happening there, so that we can get multiple different perspectives from different feedback groups. We'll use a timer probably to stay on track, and we will be taking notes as part of this conversation to inform both the planning and to modify the conversation inside the PTAC meeting as well. So in general, our agenda is that we're going to talk about the work that's being done with that committee, the Superintendent's Committee on Secondary Instructional Schedules. We're going to talk about the outreach and research that we did. And we are going to, yes?
Can you guys give me the password for the guest Wi-Fi in this building? Because there's no sensor recording right now.
Okay. We'll have to get it.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to talk about outreach and research. We'll do some, and we want to hear your feedback on the modified block schedule work as it stands right now. We'll specifically be talking about these 4 areas, what we're now calling win-win, meaning which stands for what you need and what I need from the perspective of the student being the I and the you. We'll do more on that in a bit. On homeroom or advisory, on anchor days, which we'll explain what those are, and as well as collaboration time. So those are the 4 main sort of intentional dialogue areas.
So first of all, let's talk a little bit about this Superintendent's Task Force that just started second semester of last school year. And really the purpose is an outgrowth of parts of the strategic plan in goal area 2 and some of what we would call the silver linings of COVID. And so it allowed the district head to respond to that global pandemic in many instructional ways that schools had never thought about delivering content. And so when we talk about the mission of this particular task force, they spent all last semester exploring different secondary models and frameworks. And through the work of this committee, we've been looking and examining whether there are changes to our schedules, practices that can improve or enhance the way we deliver our instruction, foster the professional growth, and the development of our faculty, staff, and student learning. So part of what you're going to hear first is just an overview of last semester's work of that task force. There was a board presentation that was given in June that provided that information as well. So, big picture, one of those pieces at the end of the second semester was now that we arrived at consensus consensus that a modified block was something that we wanted to know more about. You will hear about that today. We recognize that we need to get more feedback on those concepts from individuals outside of the task force. And this is what we're kicking off the school year. So as I mentioned before, June 2nd board meeting is the update relative to the work of this task force. And then here on the right side are all the things that we're undertaking this year. One thing that we've been very clear to talk about, any impact where this task force goes has significant implications to the teachers' collective bargaining agreement and truthfully perhaps other bargaining agreements. So regardless of what comes out of this, we would have to do that parallel to that process as well and work with the teachers union should there be any changes that are recommended and approved by the board. And the last important piece is that the task force was not looking forward to any significant changes to begin until the 24-25 school year, if there are any.
I have a question on your time frame. Is the May and June, is that 2022 or is that 2023?
That was from last May.
So May 2022.
Correct.
So that-
Each row of
Okay, so
board.
that was passed, and then June 2nd was passed, and then is it going to be June 2nd again this year?
The task force will make those decisions as the committee continues to meet.
I'm sorry, you said.
The task force will continue to make those decisions as they are meeting. We just met for the first time this academic year yesterday.
Okay, so it hasn't been decided. Those are past dates. Okay,
Correct.
thank you. You're welcome.
Mr. Valentino.
Thank you. So I'm going to try to briefly summarize the work of the committee in kind of just a few minutes. This slide represents the subsequent step to what we call a SWOT analysis, where we brought members of the task force together looking for strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats with kind of school schedules as we know them. And we spent a significant amount of time looking at essentially the pros and cons of how we do school. And from that, we attempted to identify what we consider to be priorities. What are some things that a school schedule can offer in terms of benefits? And then we kind of use those priorities and kind of a ranking process. And you can see an image of what essentially is a piece of poster paper where people voted with their feet and their stickers, kind of trying to elevate things that they felt should receive higher prioritization versus lower prioritization. And they started working their way into kind of three general bands. The top band, where you can see flexible time for study, help and support, number of classes that students experience a day, as well as staff collaboration time, received highest prioritization out of that exercise. And then the next band, you can see, are kind of clustered together with class length, lunch period, contact between students and teachers, and then explicit student skill time, and then the third band receiving kind of a lower number of stickers. So that guided the work that followed in a subsequent session, where we essentially tried to then match those priorities to 11 schedule models. And we did a lot of research and essentially tried to arrive at what are some possible options that we might want to investigate, but also how do they align with those identified priorities. And based on a similar exercise where folks used some dots to kind of identify a first, second, and third choice, we arrived at the first kind of leading schedule model, which is called a modified block. We'll talk about that in a moment. The second place was an AB block. And again, we'll talk about that as well. And then third was just the standard theory day. Okay.
Whose post-its were on that poster?
I'm sorry?
Whose input was on that poster?
Members of the task force, so it composed teachers, students, parents, and community members. And board members as well. So I want to talk briefly about the modified block, just to help you understand the term. Modified block is actually essentially what school looked like for a good number of months of the pandemic, where students are experiencing up to 4 classes per day, alternating on A-B days. The reason it's called a modified block is that, as depicted in this illustration, the middle day, consider that a Wednesday, students would meet with all of their teachers on that day. So this is somewhat of a hybrid between a block schedule and a traditional day. the items that we've kind of pointed out on the schedule that would be up for discussion would be what happens on that 8th block. Students currently take up to 7 academic classes, so we have a, kind of a block of time that we have to discuss what would occur during that time, as well as just what is the length of each of those instructional blocks. So these are kind of a template for future discussions, and that actually led to the work that we embarked upon this summer, as well as the work that the task force is going to continue to do, where we start to flesh out what the options would be related to that. But Dr. Trevino is going to tell you a little bit more about that.
Actually, we'll take a minute. That's a lot of information all at once. Are there any clarifying questions about what a block schedule looks like, or what a modified block is, that you'd like to ask or receive any clarity on? Yeah.
So are you looking at a 4-block in the center like we did, or have you looked at other schedules since Mondays tend to be off the holiday dates? Did you look at what Dallas did?
Yeah, part of the next portion of this presentation is a little bit about the research that we did, looking at a variety of other schools, mostly looking at those that had an 80 block with a modified day somewhere in it, because that was the area, as you saw with those stickers, that most of the committee liked best. I believe Mr. Latina said we looked at 11 or 12 different models, and then also considered others that were hybrids of those models, hybrids of the 11 hybrids, just to kind of get a better sense for what our options were. And really what today is about, just like yesterday, is thinking, or I guess I could talk about those right now. So these are some of the places that we pulled a good portion of information from. New Trier, Glenbrook, several, all the D87 schools, the Glenbrook schools that is, Nazareth Academy, all the 214 schools. And while Neighborhood 203 does not actually have a modified block schedule, they have a new support system where they actually have moved supports into the school day 2 days a week, which is was interesting also to look at as an example of ways that we could move in that support and flexibility that were part of the priorities in some of the initial meetings. We, as a team, broke up into groups and figured out who we were going to call, and we all decided these were the questions we were going to ask. We were going to talk about their schedule details, how those schedules work, the why did they even make the change, what was the impetus for it, strengths and areas of improvement, unintended consequences, and other feedback they've received from their stakeholders as they've made transitions over the course of the last few years. Really trying to figure out, was it a good move for you to make that change? Would you do it differently in the past? And what can we learn from your implementation? So that was part of our planning team. We, at some point, developed a metaphor. And that is that the modified block schedule is the direction that we generally felt like the group wanted to go in based on their discussion, walking towards posters, putting stickers down, moving into the general direction of more research in one area, but really still considering it to be a base model, right? Just like when you go and buy a car, you have a base model, and then you can add accessories, from different tires to heating, to a variety of things. So our metaphor here, as we begin to talk about this, is the base model is a modified block with an AB and something that anchors it, often called an anchor day. Could be on a different day, could be a Monday. Some districts have Mondays, some have Wednesdays. I will express, since this is a new group, the benefit of having it, an anchor day is that you are able to keep an AB schedule by dropping the anchor day in weeks where you only have 4 days, which is the most often modified week in a school year, where Mondays are off or Fridays are off, something like that. So anyway, we've been looking mostly at the modified block as a base model, and then thinking about what options we think can fit inside or with that base model to enhance or make our priorities come to fruition. And those are the 4 I discussed earlier, or I mentioned earlier. So we're talking about how do we equip this base model, and you can see that on the right is some version of an 80 block, alternating days, but a base model we have to think about the 8th block. We have to think about what early bird might look like. We can think about what an anchor day might look like. What's not on here are other options. So how do we decide on the length of periods. How do we decide what goes into periods? How do we decide what the options are for students during and in between periods? Right, so those are some of the discussions that we've been trying to have and that we're going to ask for your feedback on today.
Quick question, why did you do ABBA?
I'm not sure I follow.
On the right, you have an A day, B day, B day, A day.
This is a graphic that came from a website that uses, yeah, I see what you're saying. The colors make it look that way. That was not the intention to have the graphic express ABBA, right? This is from a site that we use actually with our group to talk about what the different options are. Though, that is a model that we could think about. If that's something that strikes you as worth thinking about, we can, but that has not been part of the discussion. So, in general, we would like your input on the modified block schedule, and specifically on the following 4 topics. What we're calling win-win time, which we'll explain, right? Homeroom and or advisory, anchor days in general, and then collaboration time. And in order to give you a little bit of a taste for each of those before we ask for your feedback, we have members of our leadership team that are prepped to give you the 1-ish to 2-minute elevator pitch speech on what each of these kind of looks like. What's important to know here, though, is that these are not put up as examples of things that we want to do, right? They're examples of what the other schools that we contacted are currently doing that we can pick pieces out of if we like. We can completely and wholly reject, or we can just use them as part of the conversation. So what I noticed as we led the conversations yesterday with our actual team was that they gravitated towards saying, I like that but not that, I like this but not this, or here's the problem with B that makes it not worthwhile. The general idea here is to think about the concept, see what other places are doing, and then provide some feedback about how this might look in District 86 if we were to imagine it in the future. So that's our hope, and I'm going to bring up, I don't know, Dr. Smith, Ms. Hurt.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. Jessica Hurd, Assistant Principal for Curriculum and Instruction at Hinsdale Central. Dr. Smith and I are going to present what we are calling win-win. So what I need, what you need. And so what we saw from districts who have moved to a block or a modified block schedule, that there tends to be an additional period that is added. So whether that is moving from a 6-period day, like some schools like District 214, or a 7 to an 8-period day. And so with this extra time, how would you use that block? Otherwise, this could also work in a traditional schedule in which we build in this flex time. And so up here you see, like Dr. Pepino said, this 8th block that was added, that district in their traditional schedule had a 6-period day. And then by moving to a modified block, they moved to an 8-period day. And so they turned that time into kind of a study hall that also allowed for flexibility for students to get different interventions, and Dr. Smith will elaborate on that. Another school that we looked at, they changed the time of their lunch periods. They had similar to District 86, a 25-minute lunch period. They expanded that to a 50-minute lunch period. So those of us who worked here a while, 25 minutes, but start diner food, so 50 minutes seems very luxurious in the lunch arena. Another school built in the anchor day, which Principal Walsh will tell us more about. And the last school, they designated this flex time for clubs to meet. And so they acknowledged that their students had a lot of activities outside of school, work, they had family commitments, athletics, and so they really believed in pushing that time in for students to be able to work with club sponsors to increase the amount of student participation in clubs and activities. Dr. Smith is going to elaborate what this time could be used for.
Hi, Dr. Pierce. I'm Assistant Superintendent of Student Services. So the time, the unstructured time or structured time could be used for providing additional support to students. So when you think about social emotional learning piece of it, students sometimes just need a moment to gather themselves, to reflect. It could be a supervised time. It could be time to check in with our related services providers. So they can be checking in with a counselor, with a school psychologist, with a school social worker, just thinking of those kind of things, or connecting with that adult in the building that they'd like to connect with and get advice and support from. If you think about it in terms of academic interventions or support that can be offered, students could use that time for retaking a test, getting extended time on a test. Maybe they need to develop a skill. A teacher has said to them, you need to work on this additional concept. You didn't quite grasp it, but you need a little bit more support with that. So we need time for that. I think we already talked about kind of that academic assistance and that downtime, but just thinking of when we're trying to provide additional support to our students so that they are successful, what are those times that we can build into the day that are intentional to make sure that they get the support that they need? And so this is one of the ways that we can think about using that win-win time.
So now we want to shift to questions, clarifications, comments.
So will this replace the academic reading and all of those things? So you're eliminating the direct interventions and replacing them with this?
Yeah, we haven't dug into what that would be, what it could potentially do, what other schools have done. Even in a traditional schedule, a district like Lyons Township, they moved to really creating this time, and so it's sometimes people just call the mandatory study hall. And so what we saw is that this was repeated in many different districts, and we just had never thought about that time. And so say if a student, and something that I know irks me is that sometimes say if a student has an IEP and they are in a strategies class, then they have to choose between taking an elective or being in that strategies class. They're in that strategies class, it's limiting those opportunities. Adding something like this flex time would allow us to be able to support students in a way that maybe we could reduce that commitment and give students more opportunities to take different classes. But we have not, again, we're at the surface level, we have not dug down to what that would mean in classes like academic reading.
So, New Trier does double block their lab AP Sciences, and so this lunch block is actually where the lab is for AP classes there, which I think is phenomenal. So that way you're actually giving something to kids that need an intervention as well as the added.
Yeah, for sure, and that's another example of that win-win, that time and how you're using that flexibility. So really that big takeaway from this is how do we leverage an opportunity that we're moving to the schedule to increase access to intervention, to increase access, whether it's academic or social emotional side.
I don't mean to slam you at all, but your use of the word, there is extra time. I really think you didn't mean extra time, you meant
Sure.
extra
Different time.
slot.
Yes, I
Because
apologize.
the school day is not going to change, is it?
That's a part of collective bargaining, and so all those things are on the table, and you're correct, so extra time, I misspoke, and so you're correct, and so there's an additional slot, so thank you for helping me clarify that.
Well, there is one other clarification though. There is a little bit of extra time because we've eliminated passing periods when you go from 8 classes to 4 or 7 to 4, right? So one of the things that we did note is that in a model like a block schedule, like I spoke with the people at New Trier and Glenbrook, they have somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 to 70 extra minutes of instructional time per week, just in general, because they're taking out those the additional 5-minute passing periods because you're only passing 3 times during the day.
But if you increase lunchtime, because that I think would be most beneficial to the children, is increasing lunchtime, that's not instructional time.
Yeah, remember that was just one example of this.
I understand, I'm just, I'm only one of 3 here, and I don't even have kids in school. So, I mean, this is really, if you're looking for feedback here, I don't think this is really going to be a good data point for you, but that's my opinion. My other question was, we're talking about all the things you can do with this. The using of the social services part, not when you have the full school open to do that, only one child can speak to a social, depending on how many social workers you now have, it's one-on-one then, so it's not like the entire school can go focus on there. And it is, and I understand, it's spread out, and it is another happiness point, but it's really, it's not going to be, not every child is going to be able to see a counselor or that social worker exactly during that.
No, could, and also it doesn't have to be one-on-one, it could be a group. It could be a group targeted towards a specific social emotional skill. So it could be, it could be multiple things during that time, but you're right, not every student is going to be able to go, but then they will have other places they can go and other teachers they can visit.
Chris, you
And
talked
just-
about Glenbrook, they have
7
optional
is
lunch.
passing period.
Right, they have
Or not.
7 plus lunch, but like my niece and nephew never took a lunch period. They took the full classes, so they took an extra class. Will we be doing that? Have you looked at that?
I would take that as a suggestion. Can an extra class be taken in place of something? That's what we would write down for the notes. So we don't have any of these decisions made. We're just looking for feedback. So,
I thought that was an interesting
Okay.
idea. Their teachers allow them to actually eat the class at Glenbrook.
And just one point to go back to, so we're not talking about that this would be the same, there are different models. We're not saying that all students would have this time, they'd have this flex time at the same time. It could go, there are schools in which my flex time might be first period, yours might be second period, yours might be third. There are schools in which,
Thank you for that.
yeah, and then there are schools that do a band, like Lions Township, when they have 2 periods in the middle of the day, they flex it with their lunch. So 50% of the school has that time, and then it flips, just to clarify, because I know that was confusing when I was looking at it.
Thank you for that.
For what it's worth, on the lunch thing, I think, I agree that lunches are relatively short, not for high schooler yet, but they're short all over. I do think 15 minutes seems extremely long and wasting the school day, which is so valuable, and everyone is in agreement that these kids need more instructional minutes and they need more time with the teachers and they need more time with their peers in class. So I don't know, I think there's an in-between that, and if there's a way, like what you just suggested, where you have like 2 periods each, you can split it to 4 lunches or what you need to do, and you split it in half and go from there. I don't think an extremely long lunch is, sure, if you poll kids, they will say yes to that suggestion, but it doesn't seem like an educationally sound idea for us to do for school. But, and then second, I was just wondering, these schools that you're comparing, or you're checking with and asking who may have gone to some version of this, question 1, like how long have they been doing it? What is their, some people have switched this like 2 years ago and don't know A from B, or maybe you can tell us 3 things not to do, but like, so we should, I suggest that we look at institutions, be they local, suburban Chicago school districts, or go bigger, and there are schools I know that have been doing this for much longer, and find those ones and find out what works. And I don't think that you need to completely reinvent the wheel here and just go to the places that are confident that they are doing this really well and it's working and they're getting results out of it, not just kind of like, let's try this next year and like make it be so like a quick one-night decision. It's like there's a way that this is working and let's find it and let's try to go for that.
let's shift to the second one. But just as a transition, you're 100% right, which is why we chose schools like Glenbrook, which has been, interestingly, a 2 high school district, where one was blocked for years and the other one was traditional. They had 2 different schedules, and then they moved entirely to the block, right? And a school like New Trier, which just came to this 2 years ago, and this year have made an additional change based on feedback from their community. So this is a perfect time to learn from schools like those, right? And we are trying to get run the gamut. We actually had more schools than the ones listed there. The information on these slides is from those schools, so we didn't want to change it out too much. Okay, second question is going to be about homework. I'm going to bring up Dr. Hardy. Is that right?
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Hardy, the principal here at Hinsdale South. Homeroom is probably one of the items that's most commonly known. I went to homeroom when I was in high school 200 years ago. And so we called it something different, I think. I think we called it advisory, and some schools still call it that. Homeroom is a designated segment of time where students can be attached to a faculty member, and that happens in a couple of ways. First, some homerooms in some schools, you attach those students to the same teacher for 4 years. Others don't do it that way. They say we're going to switch that up every year, and then switch up the cohort of students that you're with so that you broaden your horizons. Others, they alpha slice it, attach it to a counselor, caseload, and a teacher, and keep those students together so that those relationships are built out over time. And schools that do that, they will meet their needs, depending on which scenario you looked at. What happens during homework? A variety of things. Some schools are working on, and you've seen this in our district, the various surveys, value centers, panorama, and other Navions. There are counselor and dean presentations that go into homeroom, and they make those presentations during those times. School resource officers go in, around prom time, don't drink and drive. Remember those? We still do those. I saw our SRO presenting this summer on those things, but we had to carve time out of classes. And that is what schools are saying is one of the upsides of having a designated segment of time. Our challenge is, when we want to do all of those things that are mentioned, we have to carve time out of 2 classes typically. Get it? English, let's do it in English class because all students take that. So let's take 15 minutes from that to complete this thing, and then they can get back to English. And that'll happen over the course of the year. Or the other one that people like to snatch time from is PE. Because so many students take PE, or you have so many of them at one time. So the homeroom seems to benefit because it gives a designated amount of time at some point during the day. Secondly, it allows for a consistent bell schedule. You're not modifying the schedule every time you need to do something and sending that out to parents. And today is a modified schedule. Today is a modified schedule. There are some places and some ways in which homeroom can be placed. Forgive me for that use of that word twice. Some schools have a designated amount of time, about 15 to 20 minutes, and it's daily, every day. Other schools that we talked to had it on 2 days a week, so just think Tuesday, Thursday. You could attach it to either one A day and one B day, or say, you know what, we do homeroom on Tuesdays and Thursdays. No matter what holiday is going to impact the schedule, we'll keep it consistent. And then others have actually attached homeroom to a class. And that class is the extended class. That one period is an extended period, but 15 or 20 minutes of it is for homeroom. So that is your homeroom teacher. And then lastly, schools attached it to lunch. So they split the lunches. We heard one of our citizens talk about the lunch being too long. They take the lunch, they split it because they had a long lunch. You go to homeroom, and then you go to lunch, and you switch the kids out and get your next group of students in. That's it for homeroom. The benefits, the ways it can be designed. Do you want questions or comments?
Clarifications, thoughts, questions?
So we'll teach ruler in it?
Excuse me?
They'll be teaching ruler in homeroom?
That could be one of the suggestions if homeroom were considered as the add-on. Something like ruler or our SEO work could be in that time period. That could be one of the programs that happen.
Are we teaching ruler or is that what we're?
Physical education.
In PE currently. So
Okay?
In my opinion, it's very important to have that adult-student connection where one adult in the building is connected to the one student, so that student, feels seen. And we learned that after Colorado. So I go back pretty long. So that it's so important. So I'm surprised. It's so necessary, and it needs to be maintained because I hope it's being done, and it always needs to be there.
The schools that have homeroom, they value it as well. Quite frankly, it's at the top of the list of what we know in the industry, in the field of education, is one of the top influences on student performances. teacher-student relationships or being attached to some important adult, your person in a building. We know that that is of high value. And the schools that choose to use the time for homeroom, they see that as well. Something came up yesterday that I feel compelled to mention in response. And it came up in 3 of the groups that passed through. And that relationship is important. And they were just discussing amongst themselves. I was a part of it, but they were discussing amongst themselves. The notion of attaching a student to one adult for 4 years versus switching it each year. And what we were talking about, it was quite transparent, was when that adult isn't working. And how do we face that reality in our world, saying, you know what, they are oil and water, they don't work well together, but you just stuck me with them for 4 years. So I'm not inspired. I'm not developing a relationship. And maybe a switch up each year would be beneficial. It was just a discussion that the people at the table were having.
Needs to feel that they are being seen.
Yeah.
However that is accomplished.
However we do it.
That's the problem you need to solve. That
Yes.
schools need to solve, unfortunately.
Yeah. Agree.
Yeah,
Other
is this
comments?
like the new true
Solid.
model?
My only thought on it is that I think it's a great idea. I love it for the D181 kids that have it right now. It's phenomenal, and I'm the CELIS PTO rep for the school, and they do so much programming in the advisories, so that's like phenomenal. And they don't have a time to do it otherwise, and it doesn't all come out of PE otherwise, and the kids need PE too. And so I think it's a great idea, and especially with like I think there's a lot of ways to make it work or
Yeah, they're different.
like
ways.
reasonable, totally, yeah. And I also kind of think one per year, knowing how many faculty are in a high school, different interesting faculty to get to know, I think that there's a benefit to that. So, and maybe the pros outweigh the cons for switching it up every year because of this thing in case it's not a great fit. If it's a great fit, okay, phenomenal. You can still keep in touch with that faculty that you got to know as your advisor. But, yeah.
It could always be a choice for the student.
Thank you. I think that's our time.
So is this the new career model? Like, because
We're not,
they have
there is no model here. We are talking about concepts that could fit in a variety of models.
It's so over.
yeah, because New Trier's been doing this for like 10 years, I believe, at least.
Oh, way longer than that. We used the New Trier model when I started teaching in 2000.
Like their advisory, that is such a cool opportunity for the kids. And that's 4 years, same person,
Yes.
unless the teacher retires.
Anchor Day. Anchor Day is the concept of a modified block, the AD schedule. An Anchor Day is a day in the week. It can be 1 day, it can be 2 days, it can be 3 days, where a student would see all of their teachers. If we think of a block schedule, a student is seeing as many as 4 teachers a day, and they're alternating those. In a modified block, with an Anchor Day, you'd see all of your teachers for a designated time. It would be a shorter period than the AP block schedule, but you would see all your teachers. But in the schools that we talked to that used an Anchor Day, the advantage of it was exactly that. A student was guaranteed to see their teacher a minimum of 3 times a week. Where if you were doing an AP block, some teachers you'd see 3 times, some you'd only see 2, and if there was any break in the school week for a holiday, like we have an election day coming up, you would guarantee to only see your teachers 2 days, no matter what. But not. Anchor Day enables a student to see their teacher at least 3 times a week. And again, it depends. Some schools use an Anchor Day once, some schools use an Anchor Day twice, and some schools use an Anchor Day 3 days a week. That may go just across the border of ours. The advantage of that, like I said, is to see the teacher every day. The other advantage is exactly what everybody else just spoke about today. It creates or maintains that AD schedule on all those days, and you can modify that day's schedule to meet the needs of a homeroom or win-win or whatever other accommodation. Testing, it could be surveying, it could be the early release Wednesdays, for example. You might shorten that Anchor Day to have professional development for your staff. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility on modifying the schedule and altering the schedule on that anchor day, and then maintaining the integrity of the schedules on those block days. But again, there's a lot of options that you can do with that anchor day, including PD for staff that we know we need regarding this. Some benefit or some cost to this. We do know a number of schools dropped the anchor day after doing it for a year or two. And what they found was their initial reasons for going to it was maintaining the fact that maybe a child needs to see their math teacher or their world language teacher or even their science teacher every day to maintain the integrity of that curriculum. So we need anchor days, we need 3 anchor days, we need 2 anchor days, we need 1 anchor day so that the student is seeing their math teacher as often as possible, their world language teacher as often as possible. The schools that dropped it, what they found out after year 1 or 2 was that was a belief that seemed to resonate with those individual teachers or departments that wasn't necessarily true. Because the teachers who had appropriate planning, appropriate professional development, and appropriate skill sets to teach those classes found out they could meet the needs of their child under the block schedule and still move that child through their academic growth cycle. The other reason a school might have dropped that was there's a complete loss of regularity. You go A-B, anchor, B-A or A-B again, or you do an anchor, A and B somewhere in between it, and an anchor again on Friday. The consistency of the schedule was a complete disruption to the child and or the staff members' flow of the day. It just didn't seem to work. Particularly students who needed that pencil, paper, pencil, needed that regularity, know what they were doing. It was a disruption, trying to figure out what day was which day as you did this. The other issue that the schools found that had dropped it was there was an innate pressure on a child when they show up for school on the A day, or the anchor day, that if they had been in the class the day before, that they had to get all that homework done for the next day's anchor day. This conversations were just, it created undue pressure on the child or anxiety on the child. While the teacher might have said it's not due, or they communicated that, or maybe it hadn't communicated, who knows what the circumstances may have been. But there was this pressure on the child to feel like they had to get that homework done for the next day's lesson. So to try and remove some of that anxiety and pressure, they just said, the anchor days just don't work. They're not working for us, and those schools dropped it in that regard. So there are a number of schools that do it. Like I said, that do it 1 day a week. There are some that do it 2 days a week, and there are some that do it 3 days a week. One of the advantages of the school that I know that does it 2 days a week is you actually do the block really weird. You do 2 block instead. I don't know how you describe it. You do every day, an anchor day on Monday, an anchor day on Friday. And on Tuesday, you might see period 1. You also see period 1 on the Wednesday. But you see periods 5 and 6, or period 5 on the Wednesday, and the period 5 on a Thursday, and then every day on Friday. So they do weird iterations of it. We haven't gotten anywhere near that, but it's something to think about how you want to do the anchor day within it. Comments, questions, concerns?
I'd like to see you try to repeat your model.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah, I'd like to see you try that again.
It was very, now it's confusing to me as I say it. Imagine the students who's trying to walk that schedule day in and day out.
So what schools have dropped the anchor day?
I think we're trying to avoid calling any of those schools out, but we did have a couple that had dropped it. All right, can I go ahead and say it? Nazareth was one that dropped it. They had it for a while and then dropped it. And I want to say 214.
They decided against it.
They just, in their process, they decided against it.
But neutral at.
Neutral, right? So what's the right answer?
Yeah.
There's benefits of the anchor day because it's not disrupting those modified days. You know, we gotta get the 5 essential survey. We gotta get the panorama survey. We gotta do all these other things. You want to do a holiday concert assembly. You want to do whatever it is, you can schedule it during those anchor days because those periods are already shorter to begin with. You want to do PD for your staff. You can schedule those during these anchor days and not disrupt this calendar day for the other ones.
I'm a fan of at least 2 block days because it was a huge transition to college. Like having those longer, like 3-hour labs and stuff.
Sure.
And this would have been a great transition, having at least 2 days a week that are a block.
Well, you can't go less than that.
Right, 2 days is like, I would say 2 or 4, because I know that you have to
Do you
know
have
which day it is.
So that's your suggestion is 2 or 4?
2 or 4,
Okay.
because you have to know which color day it is when you're at New Trier, and how in the world do you know that? Like, I had to take my niece and nephew to school once, and I didn't know which day. Like, how do you know what they're going?
Eventually, kids figure it out. So let's be honest, because they're doing the schedule every day, so they figure it out.
I think if there's a way to add in the homeroom or the your time, my time, the teacher to the day into the block
Sure.
schedule day, like as a first period, shorten the first period, and then you move into the blocks, or however it works out, like minute-wise. I'm a fan of 4 block days and max 1 anchor day. If you need it for, I'm against early release, but if you need that, something like that every now and then, I can see that being helpful, because otherwise the class is acting quite like there's a mess up on those days, and it unequals kids who happen to have a class on a A day versus a B day, so you can't really mess around with that schedule very much. But if you're interested in integrity in your school day, and keeping the hours the same, keeping the day the same, most days of the week that kids are in school, I see a huge benefit to having block schedule many days of the week. I think it's good for kids. I think they get into it. I remember from my own high school days, just the packing up, the unpacking, the kids are carrying like so much stuff, and opening up the thing, getting out the computers, all this stuff, and then they halfway through class anyways. So I feel like it's great for learning, getting into the subject matter.
Thank you. Anything else?
That was a huge win of COVID, the block schedule. I mean, that was fantastic for a lot of our kids.
That's one of the reasons we got to this task force. All right, I don't know who's up next.
All right, thank you. So collaboration time, just to make sure we're using the term the same way, we're defining that as instructional team time. So if I'm an English 2 team, this is my opportunity to speak with my colleagues and maybe norm on a new rubric that we've created, make sure we're using it the same way, or maybe it's part of that curriculum development that's ongoing. I would use this time to work with that. Maybe it's to review student data. They're just given a common assessment and we're going to kind of go through the results and talk about what worked or what didn't, or that kind of nebulous concept of professional development. Just to point out, there are lots of different ways to think about this time. There's short form collaboration time, which is kind of consistently available, but maybe shorter periods of time, and then we can talk about a long form collaboration time, where you have an extended period of time where you can work together with your team. Maybe 45 minutes isn't enough to do much of a long task, so you might want a larger period. All of that's taken into account with the different models that you'll see that we heard from other school districts that they've implemented. Many of these have been layered into place in different shapes and forms. For example, School A has implemented an early bird collaboration time. They felt so strongly about collaboration time that it occurs daily. And you can see it's quite a large chunk of time from 7:20 to 8:30. You can imagine that involved a lot of conversations with the collective bargaining agreement. They've also delayed the start time of school to make that possible within their district. School B used that anchor day that Principal Walsh talked about to talk through an interesting model where on a rotating basis, imagine it's a Wednesday. This Wednesday, let's imagine that all of the English teachers are working together for a day-long collaboration day. If I'm a student, I don't attend my English class that day. Instead, I have a flexible period where I can get what I need, kind of referencing that what I need or what you need. So that's a free period where I can move to different parts of the building to get what I need, and that prevents the students from experiencing a sub that day. Instead, they're using that as their flexible time. And teachers would experience 2 of those per semester, and that would be happening on a rotating basis so that all of the teams would have 2 of those throughout each of the semesters. School C similarly used the anchor day, but very similar to how we're currently experiencing early release Wednesdays. That's when they allowed collaboration time or PD time. So students were still seeing their teachers for 38 minutes, and in the afternoon there was a block of time for regular PD or collaboration time in those afternoons. And then finally, School D, if you can imagine that extra block. It's maybe at different times of the day for each teacher, but that is unassigned, so they're not teaching a class. That's an opportunity for maybe strategically scheduling your teachers so that they have a large number of them that can collaborate during that maybe 80 to 100 minute block of time and use that for those conversations. each of these has pros and cons. You couldn't schedule all of your English 2 honors teachers off of that same block. And you would also be part of multiple content area teams, so you wouldn't necessarily be able to schedule that across all of your days. But it does show you kind of the menu of options that we might want to consider as we're looking for ways to put in that high priority collaboration time somewhere in the school day, so that we're not, again, trying to carve out time from the instructional day to make that happen, because we recognize how important that is. Okay. So, any questions you might have?
So extra block, that's the new term. They've got a block for each department. That's a period, correct?
Actually, New Trier had the opposite problem that we'll have. They actually have more classes every day than we currently offer, so they actually had to take away a class option from students to go to their block schedule. So it's not, theirs is actually school week, which is one of the things that I was most surprised at when speaking to them. Right? So you have to understand that in that model, though, and this is, I think it took a little while for students, especially the students yesterday who we were talking to see that every Wednesday, you as a student can count on one of your periods to be your own time, right? It could be English one week and then science the next week and then social studies the next week, but every student is going to have, almost every student, every single Wednesday will know that there is a block of time that is theirs. It's a test makeup time, it's a downtime, it's one of the ways that they layered in win-win time inside of collaboration time, doing two things at the same time. It's also worth pointing out that our deans did love this, because you all of a sudden have 200 to 300 students who are usually in class who are not, right? So we have to think about some of the practical pieces too. But anyway.
Could you do like assembly or something that's in that time period? Like you guys all do something really fun with kids on their period off.
Certainly is possible, yes.
Do these examples that, the data points that you pick from schools, have they experienced, do you know, and you don't have to answer this, it's just, my brain thinking, how's their attendance rate when flex time is first period? What is, I believe you have to be, when this is being planned, cognizant of those data points, that all of that stuff that you might not be seeing, it's going to snowball and you're going to go, whoa.
Absolutely.
That and collective bargaining, just being cognizant of those points.
Absolutely.
And that's really not a student-centered thing, it's an administration thing.
One of the things that we tried to acknowledge was that we did ask each school district to talk about some of the challenges of implementation. It's always a dicey topic. We often don't air our dirty laundry. So it takes a certain amount of trust to share maybe some of the challenges, but that is definitely something that we plan to continue these conversations as we start having them more. It's a fair point.
Okay, thank you. As we wrap it up, just sort of we mentioned in the very beginning, this information, Dr. Trevino has been very diligent about taking down comments and notes. We will use it to refine the information that's presented to PTAC, and then our traditional process for PTAC is just as it was here, there's a large shared group, so everyone gets that core information, and then they're divided up into table teams. And PTAC is made up of staff, administration who have been part of from the task force, and parents. And so we will get their feedback as well, and then that information will be brought back to the task force. In the meantime, after that, there's a core planning team to the task force, and we meet regularly. And so we're going to begin diving into talking about different ways to get additional perspective from different focus groups. And so that will be the work of the planning task force. And then there will be some surveys that will be created through with the task force, and those will go out. We have actually decided that the task force gets back together in November, but we know that we need to continue. These focus groups will help drive some of those surveys. So it's very appreciative and helpful, the feedback that you give us, because it will help drive some of those questions that would be very narrow and specific, because the individuals that are answering our surveys would not have had the benefit that our task force is having. They've really been thinking about talking and grappling with this issue for many hours at this point in time. So with that, unless there's a question that we did not answer, we will end this community conversations. Is there anything for the good of the order that you have a question now that maybe you didn't have earlier?
I just had a thought of, it started with when you're looking at all of this, I believe our demographics are quite important. Knowing where we are demographically, what are our students doing? Do they have outside jobs? Are they part of the family income? And that's why with COVID, we saw a lot of kids having to be frontline workers. And so, and I've been reading about District 214, and how they saw that need, they're meeting the kids where they are. And I think that's so important to know your demographics really well, to know how you can best serve them and help them. So.
What does the student programs like TCD?
Just like having a late start here September 6th, our students at TCD still started on time with their calendar, so that would be part of the work that the teams would need to do and work with TCD. And so we align with TCD and we figure out how to do it. We currently have 47 students this year. And so those are individual conversations that we would work out. Traditionally, when a student is being part of TCD, there are certain core courses that they still take with us. There are AM shifts and there are PM shifts that District 86 is elected to use the afternoon slots at TCD. And so that would be conversations that we have to work with that prep. For some students, they have to become the AM shift or whatever that is. But typically, they take PE with us, their English core, and depending on what is, they can still look for their transcript purposes, and depending on what the course or program is that they're taking at TCD. So those are individual conversations because it impacts typically 40 to 60 students. So we would work through that piece, but TCD runs an AM and a PM shift, and so it would probably be able to be worked out.
You've also got kids in internships and your invitation to teach kids.
All those pieces we worked out, yeah. So first of is to understand the model, and then we recognize we have all the individuals who will work outside that model on a regular basis. Absolutely.
What's your vision for a time frame? When do you see if there's going to be any changes? Changes are challenging. What do you see as this rolling out?
Sure. So in the beginning of the slide deck, when I said that the task force came to consensus that nothing would be impacted significantly until the 24-25 school year. In order to do that, if you were to backwards map that piece, what our goal work is to bring back sample after we have done all of these input groups. We would therefore create some actual possible schedules for people to react to, because it's one thing, these are all hypotheticals. So the task force would come together and say, we believe, when we go back to our original priorities, that was an earlier slide, we believe these different instructional schedules actually fit our priorities. And after we've had wonderful feedback from all these different groups of all the things to consider, the task force would put forth a couple of recommended schedules that they believe match all the work that the task force has been doing. And then we obviously have to make collective bargaining agreements and the board and go for that. So it's all, it depends. And if it takes a year, it takes a year. So it's really more to get it right versus a particular time schedule. The feedback is sort of, I guess, determine that.
How's it going at D99? Have you guys talked to anyone over there since they just implemented?
I have not personally, but they were one of the teams we talked about for some of the models that we shared, but it's obviously new enough that I don't know if anyone from the team here has a perspective, but I certainly do not.
I can share anecdotally that my babysitter, since I live in district, she thinks it's great. that's all I can tell you. Loves the idea of extended classes, but also regular classes, that sort of hybrid feel. But that is one student's opinion that I asked and received. So I wouldn't take that as gospel at all, but my guess is that you would probably find with any large change that it's going to take a little bit of time.
How are admin doing with it? Not or anything?
I've not discussed
They
it
must
with
be
their
going
admin.
well.
I don't think we should make any assumptions. I'll be honest, I don't want to speak on their behalf.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to call on any individual that I had conversations with. They have their model, they're working through it.
They're gonna make it work.
With that, it is 2:30, so we're going to keep to our normal 1-hour meeting, and thank you very much for your attendance, and we will post this as we have the other one. Thank you, have a good afternoon.